You know, there's this saying, the hardest thing to realize in fashion is that the future lies in the past. And honestly, the second hardest thing is to forget the past, especially in the world of haute couture. History isn't just some dusty reference book, it's literally the very oxygen a brand breathes.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolutely fascinating duality of Christian Dior. We're going to look at Dior not just as this magical creator of breathtaking runway aesthetics, but as a rigid, highly profitable corporate machine that actually funds those very dreams. We are merging the art of the dress right together with the science of the balance sheet.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the magic of couture, look at concept versus wearability, and then break down the architecture of the business. After that, we'll see how Dior defends its crown, analyze its billion-euro balance sheet, and finally uncover the true cost of luxury. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. The Magic of Couture. To really understand Dior today, we have to start at the sensory level.
Paris during Couture Week just has a completely different kind of hush to it. People aren't talking about algorithms, they are talking about hands, about ateliers, about time. And that brings us to Jonathan Anderson's Spring-Summer 2026 debut collection. Imagine this immersive greenhouse runway set. It was literally like walking under a suspended garden of memory. The emotional foundation of this entire show was actually a bouquet of cyclamen flowers gifted to Anderson by former Dior designer John Galliano. In the couture world, receiving a motif like that from a predecessor whose work was just pure theater, it's incredibly symbolic. It's a reminder that a new creative director is stepping into a room where the air still holds old sentences. That cyclamen motif repeated everywhere, in oversized sculptural earrings, in fabric echoes, tying the whole beautiful world together.
Now, it is so easy to just reduce couture to beads and feathers, right? But true couture is about the hand, the engineering, the intense hours, and honestly, the impossibility of it all. It's the way a garment does something your eyes just cannot immediately explain. It's the emotional extremity of refinement. We're not talking about costume here. We're talking about refinement taken so far that it almost becomes unreal.
Section 2. Concept versus wearability. Let's see how Anderson's debut was defined by the battle between high concept and actual wearability on the runway.
This collection actually saw some really divided audience reactions. Some folks absolutely want couture to be a theatrical fantasy. For them, Anderson's cocoon shapes, the rounded volumes, those dramatic bulbous skirts, it all felt deeply conceptual and exciting. But others, they want couture to return to real elegance and a strict silhouette. For that camp, the collection felt almost a little too close to ready-to-wear. There was this strong ghost presence in the room, an echo of Raf Simons' 2012 debut, which was famous for its quiet power and clean sincerity. Anderson is clearly a student of the house's history, but sometimes those massive volumes felt like fabric draped on models with just a little less resolution than true couture normally demands.
But then, the palette shifted. There were these lighter, softer moments of pinks and creams. Sure, but the show truly came alive when black entered. Because black is not just a color in couture. Black is architecture. Black is where you see the silhouette completely clearly, where you see the intention, and where you absolutely cannot hide behind flashy prints. When those long, sleek, almost severe black looks came out, like this stunning black column dress with a cyclamen cluster right at the shoulder, Dior's absolute authority and control came flooding right back into the room.
So we've seen the architecture of the dress, but here's the thing. The architecture of the dress absolutely cannot survive without the architecture of the business. So how exactly does a runway greenhouse fantasy translate into a massive 80 billion euro corporate empire?
Section 3. The architecture of business. To answer that question, we have to look behind the curtain at the highly profitable corporate machinery running the show.
Dior's value chain is literally a masterclass in operational control. First, you have inbound logistics. They only source the absolute top-grade materials from trusted, long-term suppliers. Then, craftsmanship meets tech. Picture this, age-old handwork happening right next to AI trend prediction and ultra-precise fabric cutting machines. Pretty wild, right? Next up is selective distribution. Dior tightly limits its products to flagship spots in massive cities and a very controlled direct-to-consumer online site to protect that aura of exclusivity. Then, digital marketing steps in to merge their grand runway shows with online storytelling. And finally, bespoke after-sales. Custom fittings, exclusive client parties, they keep the customer completely locked into the Dior universe.
So the absolutely crucial point here is connecting that creative risk to the corporate reality. Jonathan Anderson's Dior is intellectually exacting, and it's divisive by design. It puts concepts first and wearability second. But Concept first only works when the concept is perfectly resolved in the actual garment. Otherwise, well, without the massive LVMH corporate budget backing it up, an unresolved artistic concept just becomes exactly what critics fear, a mood board with a really big budget. The business framework is what actually funds the fantasy.
Section 4. Defending the fashion crown. With that machinery humming along, Dior has to constantly build a moat to defend its spot at the summit of luxury.
Think of their strategy like building a corporate fortress. The threat of new entrants, it's incredibly low. Why? Because the sheer amount of capital required to build this level of brand prestige, global advertising, and retail infrastructure is just astronomical. However, the industry rivalry itself is fierce, it is relentless. Dior is constantly battling with other heritage titans like Chanel and Hermès. It's a heavyweight fight won through consistent innovation, massive marketing spectacles, and aggressive geographic expansion. They also have to navigate buyers who are demanding absolute digital transparency and sky-high quality. Supplier relationships are critical too, since Dior relies on a very small, exclusive pool of rare artisans and raw material experts. And finally, you've got the threat of substitutes. Now obviously, you can't substitute a Dior dress directly, but the booming fast fashion and resale markets are constantly nipping at their heels. It forces Dior to endlessly innovate just to prove the worth of buying something brand new.
Section 5. The billion-euro balance sheet. Okay, let's look at the hard numbers from the April 2026 Annual General Meeting.
For the year 2025, Dior reported massive total sales of 80.8 billion euros. Now, it's worth noting this actually represents a slight 1% organic decline compared to the previous year, which honestly just reflects some incredibly tough global economic headwinds. But even with a slight dip, 80.8 billion, the sheer scale of that revenue is almost hard to even wrap your head around. Their financial structure is just a rock-solid fortress. Even with a modest tightening in profits over the last 3 years, with operating profit moving to 17.7 billion euros in 2025, their equity sits at a massive 66.5 billion. They intentionally maintain very conservative debt levels, meaning they keep plenty of cash handy to navigate market challenges and, crucially, to fuel those big creative risks on the runway. If we break down where that 80.8 billion comes from, we see exactly where the power lies. Fashion and leather goods completely dominate the revenue stream, bringing in a staggering 37.7 billion euros. Selective retailing, watches, and cosmetics are absolutely massive businesses in their own right, but the core identity, the bags, the shoes, the couture, that is the absolute anchor of the entire LVMH-backed empire.
Section 6. The true cost of luxury. Maintaining a machine of this sheer size comes with incredible risks that go way beyond just hitting quarterly revenue targets.
Recently, some very real supply chain concerns have emerged within the wider luxury sector. There have been investigations noting labor exploitation in certain Italian workshops that produce goods for the market. These types of issues act as massive reputational risks. For a brand whose entire value proposition relies on prestige and flawless craftsmanship, implementing and maintaining incredibly strict, long-term supplier audits isn't just a nice-to-have. It is a critical business necessity to protect their long-term value.
And this brings us right back to the core challenge of Christian Dior today. The job of a creative director like Jonathan Anderson and the job of the executives managing the balance sheet is ultimately exactly the same. It's to take a flawless, historic past and make it feel completely inevitable right now. They constantly have to balance the quiet reverence of a hand-embroidered cyclamen flower with the relentless, loud corporate demand for growth, scale, and cultural relevance.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. When you look at an 80 billion euro empire, you really have to ask yourself, is true luxury ultimately about the jaw-dropping beauty of the dress on the runway, or is it actually about the absolute perfection of the corporate machine that sells it to the world? I want you to think about that as you reflect on the interplay between art and commerce that we've explored today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.